That's what I tell the kids, right? Make sure you get the information. What you think about it, that's up to you. What you're going to do with it, that'll soon be up to you. But make sure you get it. See, there's nothing worse than being stupid. Nothing. I mean, being broke is bad, but being stupid is awful. And what's really bad is being broken stupid, right? That's about the end of the world. I mean, there isn't anything much worse than that. Unless you're sick. Sick, broken, stupid. I mean, that is it, right? There's nowhere else to go. So make sure you get the information. It's key. You don't have to like it, but learn it.
That's the dumbest, smartest shit I ever heard.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We have today a very special edition of the Idiot Philosophers podcast. I am your host, as always, Malachi Agee. Joining me, as always, Oscar Camaño. How are you today, sir?
Hello, world. Doing great. Feeling fantastic.
Good, good, good. And our usual intern, Easy E, is not here with us today, but we have our intern, another intern, Joan, in the back. How you doing, man?
Pretty good, guys.
Good, good, good. Guys, we have a fantastic guest. We are excited and honored and privileged to have this gentleman with us today. He has a background and expertise in management, public policy, community, and government affairs. He was appointed by President Barack Obama to serve in the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Currently, I believe he is the Director of Strategy for La Cocina in VA. So, Mr. Elvis Cordova, welcome. How are you today?
Thank you very much. I'm great. I'm excited to be here with you guys.
Absolutely.
Being part of this great endeavor that you all are embarked upon.
Cool, cool. So I think, we just want to jump sort of right in and tell us briefly, your story, how you got to where you are today, and just share a little bit about what you're doing now and how you got there.
Thank you very much. Well, my story begins as most American dreams do, right? Parents immigrated here from El Salvador to escape a civil war there. And although I was born here, I grew up there. When I was 1, we had moved to El Salvador, and then the war broke out. Obviously, no parent wants their child growing up in such an environment. So we relocated up to Boston. And went through the whole public school system there, was fortunate enough to attend college. Northeastern University, graduated with criminal justice, and then had to find my way for a while. I worked in investment banking, then traveled abroad looking at economic development, went to grad school as a result of that in New York, at New York University, and then really started my career more in the public sector, which at the UN, worked for the city of New York for a while, made my way to Washington, D.C. through a fellowship program, and then really worked at a couple of different agencies there, one called the Farm Credit Administration, Department of Energy for a short stint, and ultimately got called by the White House for a political appointment with the Obama administration at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And so it's been a whirlwind, but along the way there's definitely been people, there's been situations, and then there's been lessons there that I've been fortunate enough to keep an eye open for and kind of explore those possibilities, which led me on this amazing ride.
Yeah, that's great, man. And just to kind of go back, Elvis, so parents immigrated from El Salvador. And for our listeners out there, we all have our stories. Folks come from all over the world. What was the backdrop on that? What were your parents doing at the time, moving from El Salvador to Los Angeles, and then having you come into the world in L.A.? What was their positions? What were they doing in L.A. That made them go back to El Salvador, and from that point on?
Sure, absolutely. One thing was, and I always focus on this, right? The American dream. And I think here in the United States, we are blessed with it being the land of opportunity. My dad always said to me, he goes, don't mistake what that means. Just because you're here, nothing will be given to you. Right. It's that you can go after it, right? That's what opportunity is. So most folks get caught up in that. And so he goes, you have to work hard for it. But the possibility is there for you to really rise above your situation and be able to accomplish more than you thought you could if you put your mind, heart, and soul into it. And so, that's initially what brought them here. They wanted opportunity. They were actually well off in El Salvador, but they wanted more. And they came here. But LA in the late 70s, wasn't the most welcoming place in terms of, there was gang violence kind of brewing, economic development in that area, and they just didn't like it. And so they moved back to El Salvador, and they said, okay, we experienced that. We went through that. They answered that particular question in their lives. Well, as it happens, when they came back to El Salvador, things didn't get any better in terms of there was a civil war that was breaking out. And they also didn't want their children growing up in such an environment. So they eventually, we lived in the capital, and the war kind of breaks out in the rural areas. But as it gets closer and closer to the urban areas, they're like, okay, we can't do this. In El Salvador, my mom was an entrepreneur, and my father was an engineer for the government at the time. And so he was reluctant to leave, but she's like, no, I don't want the kids. I mean, one of the things, I remember firefights, like, the army and the guerrillas shooting it out and everybody just hitting the ground. So my mother's like, no, we can't have this. Any one of those stray bullets could have hit any of us, and that would be it. So what ended up being a temporary move to Boston ended up becoming the rest of our lives. So my sister was actually born in El Salvador, but the rest of my siblings ended up being born in Boston.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's pretty crazy story, especially in those times. So now you're in Boston. You grow up there with your family. Go to Northeastern University. So what? From that point, did you go abroad right after school? Was it school programs?
Yeah, school programs. So it's funny, right? There's this word serendipity, which I love using because that's essentially random chance, or almost random chance with a higher purpose. And I had a friend who had always said to me, he became my roommate, he goes, we have to go study in Spain, man. That's the thing to do. I said, all right, cool. When are we going to do it? He goes, someday. I said, all right, great. What day is that again? I just want to put it on my calendar here. And, just life took us different places. And, he never got the opportunity to go. But that seed just really fermented and grew in my mind. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go sign up for it. I was fortunate. Part of the reason why he didn't go is he had dedicated so much of his extracurricular activities to this organization, the Latin American Student Organization that we belong to. And one of the things they created was a scholarship for Latino students. And I was one of the beneficiaries of that. And so that then allowed me the financial means to be able to apply to this study abroad program. So that was my first foray. So I went and I studied in Spain, and it was eye-opening in terms of both culturally, but it opened up my mind to saying, wow, there is a bigger place than Boston out there, right? That was my world at the time. And I said, I got curious again, and another new seed kind of gets fermented, saying, what else is out there? Right. That ultimately led, I lived in Argentina for a while. I lived in Brazil for a while, went back to Europe many times to just keep on exploring. But that was initially the beginnings of kind of my opportunities to be able to travel outside of my immediate environment.
Sure. And when you were, a young man first going to school, I believe I saw that you went for criminal justice. Is that correct?
Yes.
So what was your, original passion or your original goal getting into school, that led you into the criminal justice field? And did you always want to be in politics or in the government, or, talk a little bit on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. What happened there was, and I always encourage kids to begin exploring their passion early. Answer those questions. It took me a little longer to do it, but I'm glad I went through. One of the great things about Northeastern University is they have this co-op program, which you work one semester and you go to school one semester. And it's a great balance of real world experience with classroom experience. And the two can be very different at times, right? What you see in the real world isn't necessarily what you see in the books, right? I think what the books do is provide you an introduction. The real world is very drastically different at times. And so everybody had always said, "Oh, you make great arguments. You're good at speaking. You're going to be a great lawyer," right? This kind of kept popping up. So I said, I guess I'm going to be a lawyer. I had not explored that, but people were telling me this. So I kind of go into criminal justice kind of with a pre-law track. After a couple of co-ops with Northeastern, I was like, this isn't for me. And I'm actually very grateful that I was able to find that out, because if I had kind of gone to school without co-ops and then said, okay, I'm going to be a lawyer, and then I go to law school and then realize that's not for me, all of that time and all of those resources would have just not been spent right. And so I was able to adjust. I ended up finishing with criminal justice because, one, I think policy is what started to really become an interest. Through the Latin American Student Organization, we became activists in terms of we were able to establish a Latina Student Center, and make changes within the faculty and administration of the school. So that type of policy, governance, those activities really appealed to me, and I found meaning in that, in terms of I can change my immediate community, being part of this group. And so I think that becomes the beginnings of my interest in public policy.
Sure.
I was a criminal justice major as well, and my favorite class was actually constitutional law. Oddly enough, of all the classes, that's just how laws get made,
Yes.
and the results from cases being brought in to, that's how future policy is written. That part just fascinated me.
Yes.
So I understand your interest in that for sure.
Yeah. Now, going from that, Elvis, I mean, you kind of discovered this power, right? That with that effort and cooperative effort, you can change the community around you. What would you say to listeners out there right now that, one, are in school right now, or might not be in school and are trying to do something with their lives and trying to figure it out, and also for young parents that are out there, what are some advice that you would give to them to kind of help their kids understand and make those decisions to find their passion, or to be able to figure out what it is that they really want to do? Because we talked about, if you would have gone on and went to law school and then figured out, hey, this is not really for me, I got to go take a few steps back now and figure it out again. What are an advice that you would give to these people to say, hey, this is maybe a faster track of figuring out your passion and what you can do for the world?
It all begins with questions, and asking the right questions. In terms of life is all about exploration, right? The most successful people, kind of those that have hit the stratosphere, the Bill Gates, the Elon Musks, the Steve Jobs, the Michael Dells. It's those folks that were able to figure out early on what they wanted to do. And by doing that, they were able to just get that head start in terms of their work and their exploration. I think most of us don't always have that benefit of having a stable home, a stable community around us. But that doesn't mean that we can't seek it out and search it, right? My parents used to say, life is not fair, but it can be good. And meaning that some of us sometimes give up that control that we have over life, right? And that's a shame, because then we just become victims, not really realizing that we're on a journey, and that bad things will happen in that journey, and obstacles will be in that journey. And those, to me, at least how I perceive them, are opportunities for us to shine, break through, and grow, right? Naturally, when you grow, even biologically, your bones are being stretched to their farthest limits. So you have to do that for your mind and spirit. And saying, hey, I have to figure out a way out of this. Unless you want to stay stuck in there, right? Which not most of us want to stay stuck in a bad situation. And so, and I get it, there's varying degrees of worse, right? But counter to that is also varying degrees of spirit and support that we can seek out. So I would say start asking the questions of, what is it that motivates me? I think first it starts internally, right? Look at what motivates you. There's this old adage, if you had $1 million, what would you do with your time? And that's a critical question, because what is it that motivates you, right? What is it that you would do if you weren't getting paid for it, right? And that begins to shine a light on what it is that your interests are, right? And once you can kind of identify those interests, saying this is what motivates me. I always tell groups that are young students that I talk to, saying, look, once you find your passion and you're able to follow it and develop it, what ends up happening is that work isn't work anymore. It's an experience. And I'm like, maybe that's why they call it professional experience, right? Because you're doing something and you're pursuing something and all of you is into it. And I think that becomes the beginning, right? What is it that I like to, whether it be art, whether it be drawing, whether it be writing, whether it be, playing around, breaking things apart and, the mechanics of it all, or creating a business, whatever it may be, just ask you, kind of begin there. I think once you do that, the next step is look at people who've become successful at it, right? You don't want to reinvent the wheel. The wheel's already there. Look at people who've done it and start modeling after them, right? Reach out to them. I think any successful person will do two things. They will always tell you their story, right? Because they love celebrating that particular part of their journey. And then number two is they'll always want to help out somebody who's interested in also becoming successful. It just adds to the general circle of community that successful people like to build. And so as a young person, I would say, those two things, take the time to look at what interests you, what motivates you. And then number two, seek out those that can help advance that particular interest are important. From there, you'll be able to then figure out what your curriculum is in terms of what things you need to read, what things you need to do, where you need to go to school, or what programs, or how to pursue it. But those are I would say, two critical steps.
On there. Now, was there a time, as young man figuring things out, was there a time where you maybe reached out to someone that was maybe in a field of profession, and at that time they didn't reciprocate at that moment, and what did you learn from that, and how did you change your approach for the next time? Yeah,
great question. It was funny. It's kind of an inverse of that, where so one of the first portion of my career was actually in investment banking. I got to graduation day, and I had been so caught up on finishing school and doing the work that we were doing with the Latin American Student Organization, and I'm sitting there about to get my degree, and I said, I don't have a job. I was like, I forgot to check off that box. And a friend of mine, gave me a heads up. They're like, hey, Fidelity Investments is hiring. You should go talk to them. And so, I started in investment banking for 3 years. Eventually, after a while, I made it up to this company called the Harvard Management Company, which is part of the Harvard University. I had a great boss, this guy named David Solnier. And he said to me, he kept trying to get me to take these CFA and CPA tests, Certified Public Accountant or Certified Financial Advisor. And I kept kind of putting those off, right? And he calls me into the office. He goes, okay, what's up? He goes, I keep giving you these opportunities. You're not taking them. Do you not want to? And I'm like, great, I'm going to get fired. and he says to me, he goes, and this was like a real moment where I had to be honest with myself as well as with him. I said, it interests me, but I don't see this as my career. He goes, then what do you see your career? What's going on here? Let's talk about that. And so we had this honest conversation about where I wanted to go. And that's where economic development pops up for one of the first times. It had been kind of latent in all of my activities, but I'm like, economic development. He goes, all right, why? And we went through that process of asking the right questions. And through that, the responses came out, and I started discovering it was like, oh, these are the reasons why it motivates me. I want to help people. And I want to help people by helping expand their wealth and teaching them how to create their wealth and, building communities and entrepreneurship. These things start getting teased out. And so he goes, all right. And after the conversation, he goes, well, if you want to do that, and particularly was international development at that point, he goes, well, you should go to a developing country. And there I had a path forward. But to more specifically answer your question, there were times where people either didn't have time to speak to me or, just didn't want to, they didn't have time to, just provide me with, and it was saying, all right, on to the next one, right? Once you're on a path and you know what you want, there should be nothing that should stop you, right? It's just, to me, I came up with a weird formula that I wanted for every 3 no's, I wanted 1 yes. And that worked in both dating as well as in life, So to me, no's became just a temporary setback. And eventually they just became the process that I had to go through to get to a yes, right? So I lost the fear of no's, right? And I always tried to bring out a kernel out of that. Right? For every no, did I not approach it right? Again, it goes back to questions. What questions do you ask yourself? So what did I not learn right? What could I have done better? How could I approach this differently? I think some of us, when we get no's, ask ourselves the wrong question. Oh, why am I a loser? Or why am I always failing? And believe it or not, your brain works in a particular way. It works just like a computer. In that, if you go to a computer and you put in search, search for blue, it'll give you everything that has anything associated to blue, right? And so your brain is the exact same way. And so if you ask yourself, why am I so dumb? It's going to go find reasons why you're dumb. Right. But if you ask yourself, what am I not learning, or what could I have done differently? Your brain will find those things subconsciously. So the right questions become key in this process.
What I wanted to touch on briefly there was, you talked about, here you are 3 years into a career, and you kind of know this isn't what I want to do long term. What thought process and what mental process did you go through to actually make those first steps to move away from that position into doing what you originally or eventually wanted to do and were passionate about? Because I think that's something that a lot of people get stuck on. They're in that job, and it may not be the job that they want to do or the career path that they want to follow forever, but they're getting that paycheck, they're collecting, their benefits, and it's very difficult for them to move into something that they really love and enjoy doing. So talk just a little bit about, what leap you had to take, a leap of faith, as some people call it, but the steps that you took to get into the career and the future that you wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. I always believe in risk. And I believe even more so in mitigating that risk, right? And so definitely don't quit your job and then go find something. How about find something while you have a job, right? And so it goes back to our free time. And our free time it's a very valuable tool. And so what I started doing when I knew that after my conversation with David, my boss, who's become a great friend of mine since, And he said, you need to go explore these things, and you need to go to a developing country. So I now had I had a peek into what I wanted to do. Like I had glimpsed through the window and saw what was on the other side, but now is a matter of saying, all right, what is there? And so talking to people, I think, is the best thing, right? So identifying folks who had done what you want to do or you think you want to do, and start there. And so I just started talking to people. Hey, who do you guys know? At that point, for some reason, Argentina. In fact, I think David had said, why don't you go to Argentina? That economy is about to fall apart. And you could see how an economy deconstructs and how it can be helped to redevelop, right? So, and I also, ironically enough, serendipitously enough, maybe, I also had this interest in Argentina after Spain. So I said, okay, cool. Things are beginning to align. Keep your eyes open because the clues are there, right? It's just a matter of you connecting those dots. And so there I went, and I started talking. I asked folks, who's been to Argentina? What's going on there? And how would it work in Argentina? So through that, I ended up connecting. You're not going to find the answer right away. It's always going to be about 5 or 6 either conversations later or connections later. But through that process, I ended up connecting with somebody who worked at the embassy, the U.S. Embassy, that worked in the Foreign Commercial Service. And I was able to get an internship there when I got to Argentina. And through that, I began working with, companies that were developing in Argentina, U.S. companies that wanted to bring business to Argentina, folks who were doing economic analysis. So my background in finance helped because it provided me with that first step to understand what that next step was going to be. So it's really all about going and finding, asking the questions and finding those paths on your free time. Right. One of the things I remember, I went to Argentina on a study abroad program. And one of the things I did is I have to finance this trip. So one of the things I did, I swear to you not, I went and, or I swear to you, actually, I went and I found 100, the goal for myself was 100 different scholarship programs that would pay for such a trip. And then I went and I created cover letter, a budget, proposal for my project, letters of recommendation, and just some articles that backed up. And I had a packet ready, and I developed it in a way that all I had to do was change the title of who it was going to, and just little changes.
Cut and paste.
Exactly. Yeah. The early cut. But this was around just before the turn of the century, so around 99. And so every day I would come home. I remember my roommate, man, he'd look at me like always shaking his head. He's like, man, you're on this mission here. He was fascinated by it. And he actually helped me in a great deal. He kind of, I'll tell you that in 1 minute. But what I was doing and what he saw me doing was every day after work, I would come home and I would put together these packets, right? So during my free time at work, like around lunch, I'd go and I'd research, print them out. I'd come home and I'd start putting together these packets, right? So every day he saw me for a couple of hours. I'd lay it all on the ground and I'm putting together these packets, putting them in the mail, getting ready to mail them out the next day. And he was just marveled by this. He never had seen somebody just so determined to pull something off. Eventually, I did end up raising about half the money I needed to go. And that was devastating because I'm like, man, I'm halfway there and I got, less than a month to go. And then faith kicks in. Right? Where I'm like, well, if I believe in this, I have to have faith in this. And I'm a spiritual person. I'm definitely wear my beliefs on my shoulder. And I was like, God, if you brought me this far, I know it's for a reason. And I know that there's still more for me to learn. So I'm just going to trust in this. And sure enough, I stopped worrying about it. And I just had that blind faith that I was going to get there. And that blind faith was answered by my roommate, who said, man, I've never been so impressed by somebody doing so much to get there. You're almost there. I'll give you the rest. Wow. That's exactly what I said. I was like, damn, dude, you sure? He goes, dude, just go. I want you to do it. And man, that guy is always in my heart for that, that help that he was able to provide me with. And so, yeah, on I went. But again, I think so. Again, it was a calculated risk, right? I was going to leave. I was going to go to a new country. But I was on my free time doing this. So it laid down the work to do all of this.
Absolutely. And for the listeners out there, if you're listening to Elvis' story, we all have our own journey. We all have our own path that we're trying to, create and get to our end goal, if you will. And your journey took you across the world with, calculated risk and saying, oh, man, I only have half of this, but I'm just going to go for it and see what happens, So for folks out there, just know that your immediate surrounding is not the end goal. That's not where you're stuck. Opportunity arises with the 6 billion people in this world, and they're everywhere in all kinds of countries. So now, Elvis, you're doing internships. You're propelling yourself with all this experience. Now, with all this experience that you're getting, did you at that point have an end goal in mind, or was it, let me just keep gaining this experience and I'm still trying to digest and figure it out? And what kept you motivated to keep moving forward?
I had a general direction of where I wanted to go. The end goal wasn't as clear yet. And I think that's okay. I always push younger folks, the clearer that picture can be, the quicker you'll move to get there. but it's all right even if it's a little fuzzy, right? Just momentum. Momentum is the important thing in life. So just keep moving, right? There's many times where I've moved one direction and then quickly shifted another way, finding years later that one little, sidetrack that I took, there's some knowledge there that ended up helping me for something later. And so I always sit down and say, like, wow, that's where that piece fits in. Again, I'm going to go back to my roommate, this guy Todd, he gave me this great analogy. He said, sometimes life is like a puzzle, right? Like a jigsaw puzzle. Sometimes you are there and you're putting it together and there's this piece and you swear it goes over here and you're trying to jam it in and you're not understanding why it doesn't go in there. And what you have to do is you have to put that piece to the side and keep on working on the parts of the puzzle that you can figure out. And later on, you'll be like, this is where this piece goes. In fact, finding that it goes someplace else. And so that's, to me, is the greatest analogy of what can be done with life, right? You work at it. And sometimes you'll hit that barrier or you don't know kind of how it's, just keep on moving there. And then, things will sort themselves through your efforts. You have to become an active participant in your life. But definitely, the clearer you can have that picture, all the better. But in the meantime, get that momentum going. It's like they say, things aren't meant to be perfect, but perfect should not get in the way of good.
Now, give me a time, Elvis, where as you're doing all these things, maybe you had a moment. We're all human. Things don't always go as planned, all right? And that's just how life works. Give us a moment maybe where you felt at that moment where it was just, I want to give up right now. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't think I want to move forward. So take us to a moment where you had that kind of experience and what you did to get yourself out of it.
Yeah. So, wow. And this coincides with this time period. I was around Thanksgiving, maybe almost 10 years ago. So after I worked in government, I had left government for a while, calculated risk. I wanted some more management experience. And, things didn't work out. And then I had to go back into government and I just didn't have that fire that I did before. And I was just, to me it was a job, but I wasn't passionate about it. And so I was interviewing at different places, going after jobs that I wanted to. So then there came this barrage of no's, right? No. And I'm like, so this fear began to set into me. Am I going to be stuck in this job for the rest of my life? Right? Sometimes a job is a blessing. And other times you're like, wow, it's just, that's what I think folks who are either entrepreneurs or folks who are really high achievers have to learn how to deal with no, right? I forgot who said it, but it might have been a president. I can't recall right now, but it said, great individuals live quiet lives of desperation, right? And so I was going through that. And so I had gone through this job interview. It was for an organization, Teach for America, I remember. And I had gone through like 7 interviews or 5 interviews, over the span of like 3 months, right? And I was like right there up to the end, right? I'm like, oh my God, this is going to happen. This is amazing. I'm all psyched, all pumped about it. And day before Thanksgiving, I get an email saying, thanks, but we didn't select you. And I'm like, wow, this was kind of like one of my last things that I was going for. And I just wish they would have sent it after Thanksgiving because you just ruined my Thanksgiving. I was driving up to Boston and I was so depressed. And I'm like, because I just didn't have anything else in the back burner. And so I get to Boston. And so this is central to my life. And I think that, maybe in a way, God, had his hand in this, where I go home and I'm with my family. And to me, my family is the center of it all. I've always said that if, I'm a success to the world, but a failure to my family, I've failed, right? Because it's my family when I go back that recharges my batteries. It's when things have fallen apart that they uplift me, right? And so I came home a defeated man, and my family, you know, they don't judge you, right? Family doesn't judge you. Family loves you. Family nurtures you. And so I went home, and for, you know, about 4 or 5 days, I was nurtured by that love and that caring. Well, I come back to D.C., and about a week later, I get a call from the White House. And they're like, hey, and so I had almost given up on the White House because it was about 2 years that I had kind of started this appointment process, and, you know, nothing had happened. And I get this call, and they're like, hey, we'd like to bring you in for an interview. And I was like, wow, all right. Ironically enough, all of that work that I had gone through for these other interviews had sharpened my ability to interview. So I kind of go into the White House in December of 2011, right? And to make a long story short, by the end of January 2012, I have a job offer from the White House to be a political appointee at USDA. And so it was, I think, you know, knowing where to go. To me, it was home, knowing where to go to recharge and refuel yourself and get ready for that next battle or, you know, that next endeavor. That's always been critical. In fact, every time things go bad, I know where to go.
Sure.
And it's to go home, right? And to just be around that love, support, and warmth. And for some people, it may not be family. I know that that's a reality too. So then go and find that group that can do that for you, whether it be friends, colleagues, whatever it may be, church for some people, you know, go create that for yourself because you need that cushion for a soft landing. Absolutely.
So now you're going from this depressed moment, you spend time with family, you get this awesome phone call unexpectedly. So now you interview at the White House.
Yes.
How was that feeling, man, pulling up to the White House and they're actually opening the gates for you? You know, I've been to the White House, man, but they had like 4 Secret Service agents in front of me like, buddy, you better back up.
Yeah, it was, it's a real experience, right? In terms of the Obama White House was very interesting because it was full of a lot of young people. It was very energetic and just, you know, the whole mantra with Obama was, you know, let's build something new. And to build something new, it demanded people with a fresh perspective, which was younger folks. So I remember, you know, interviewing with them, but I was not nervous. I kind of felt, you know, seeing all these young people around me, it's like, all right, I feel at ease here. And it was, you'd always know an interview goes good when it turns into a conversation, and that's what it ended up being for me. I was in the Indian Treaty Room. It's a beautiful room, and it's like just majestic, right? And so you're like, wow, here I am, this little guy in this huge room where treaties have been signed, and, you know, diplomats have, and kind of just going through that there. It was somewhere deep down inside, things felt right. And that's when that was to me an internal clue, you know, that this is going to work out. So give it all your best. Everything you've learned, now put it forward, right? All of these no's are going to lead. I've gone through enough no's to get to that yes. But, you know, still putting everything I had forward. And it just, things began to click. I mean, just the speed of it all. And all the lessons, right, of knowing who to call, what questions to ask, how to prepare, how to present information, they all culminated into that. Wow. So it was just feeling, felt right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I had a conversation with someone recently where we were discussing, you know, going through certain moments in life. And a lot of people forget that those moments are sharpening you, are getting you ready for your true calling. So that's pretty amazing to see that, you know, all those no's, all those interviews, you know, those times you spent, you know, preparing and getting nervous and making sure the suit's ironed correctly. And, you know, prepared you for that moment. And then you were at ease and it just flowed together, man. That's amazing.
One thing about that too is, despite all that, I'd say remain flexible. Bruce Lee, right? There's this famous clip by Bruce Lee. He goes, "You want to be like water. Water is powerful. Water will, you know, move around and it'll be fluid and it can't be stopped because of its fluidity." One piece of this interview, which is, it's the last part of the interview, but what ended up being the most important thing. Initially, I was being considered for roles at the Department of Energy, right, because I did have experience in that. And as the interviewer is walking away, she says to me, "By the way, what about agriculture?" And I said, "Well, I've kind of been in agriculture for the last, 5-6 years. I was kind of looking for something new, but why do you ask?" And she goes, "Oh, there's this chief of staff position in one of the areas at USDA, which you might be good for." And I was kind of thinking, maybe we could send your resume over there too. And I said, "Why not?" Right? I kind of remained open to that last question there. And I said, "Why not?" And that was actually the job that moved the quickest and where I ended up being. So USDA wasn't the initial, the initial point of interest for all of us. They were looking at energy and all these things. But if I had not remained open and flexible to that last part, things wouldn't have opened up for me the way they did. So even though everything is always, it feels going correctly, remain fluid like water, as Bruce Lee would say.
Be like water.
Well, I wanted to piggyback a little bit on that, and sort of take it practically speaking. What you have a fascinating story and journey, and I think for a lot of people working in government, especially in a high level of government like that, it just seems like so out of the picture, so out of the question for them. But talk a little bit about some of the personal decisions and personal habits. I know you're bilingual, you speak 4 languages, I believe.
Yes.
Just talk about some of the day-to-day habits that you've input into your life. What do you do to help yourself grow and continue to grow day in, day out? Whether it's ways that you commit your time to certain things or certain things you study, people you listen to, that kind of stuff. I know before the podcast started, we were talking a little bit about some of the information that we take in through different podcasts.
Absolutely.
Just share with the listeners and with us some of the personal habits that you've developed over the years, because those are the practical things that people can take away and say, this is how I apply someone else's success to my own life. This is, I heard on this podcast that I could start this, and it gives somebody an actual practical thing to do. So, share a little bit on that.
Absolutely. There's, I think I was with Jonah, we were talking about this yesterday, how you never stop learning, right? And that's just because you're out of school or you finished a program or anything, it shouldn't stop you from learning. Learning is a constant, everyday ritual. It should be for all of us as it is for me. And I think the day you stop learning is the day you die, right? So it goes back to that saying, evolve or die, right? And so you're always evolving as a person. So central to all of this for me is always learning, right? Always filling myself with the latest and newest information, looking at what other people are doing that inspires me and how can I mimic this. When I was little, one of my coping mechanisms that got me through when I was nervous or unsure of myself was I would think of who I knew that had that particular attribute, right? So who was a good speaker? Who was a critical thinker? Who was a good decision maker? Who was a good motivator, right? That I knew. So it goes back to surrounding yourself with people that inspire and motivate you. So I would think of them and I would be like, what would this person do in this situation? And it's almost like evoking their spirit or evoking their talent or their power. And, I would be like, this is what they would do, so this is what I'm going to do. Or even better, I'd call them and be like, hey, I got this situation. What do you think? Right? And running it through them. And if I couldn't do that, then I would evoke their spirit or their talent and kind of follow that path. What I've become really, really disciplined about is using my mornings wisely, right? And this has been something that's, I'd say over the last 2 years has been developing more. I used to be a night owl where I could work into 3 or 4 in the morning. And as I've grown older, I've become to value the mornings. One of the things I do in the morning is, I think, easing into the morning. So I'm getting up earlier, and I could never imagine getting up 5 o'clock in the morning. That's still my goal. I'm not quite there yet, but a lot of the folks I've been listening to in podcasts and motivational speakers talk about the power of, getting up in the morning. And so I've slowly been getting there. You know, I'm now up to like, you know, 6, 5:45 and slowly creeping up. And every now and then I'll creep up on the 5 hour. But getting up in the morning, and I think the first part is taking the first 10 minutes of the day to just do 3 things, right? Number 1 is just be grateful for being able to get up, being able to breathe, being able to have a shelter above you, be able to have heat, being able to have that glass of water, which is the best thing you can drink in the morning to get your physical system started. Being grateful for that, I think that primes the mind in a very good way. The second thing is thinking about, I like to do a prayer. Some people like to meditate. Sometimes I alternate between both.
Sure.
Sometimes I'll just meditate. There's some great apps on for that help me with my meditation.
What are some of those apps?
I mean, Headspace is one I've been listening to great because it explains, you know, a little bit what, you know, how the meditation process works. So I really like Headspace. And so going there and just Calm is another one where you're just, you know, listening to, but I think the thing is there to really clear the mind, right? And just, you know, have a blank canvas. And as soon as that canvas is blank, then the next thing I do is, what do I need to do today? Like, what is my goal for the day, right? So I begin with gratefulness, clear my mind, right? So my mind's automatically, now it sees abundance, right? It sees happiness. Then you clear it, right? It's in a good mood. So you clear your thoughts, you clear the canvas, and then you think of, this is what my art piece or my masterpiece is going to be today. And after that, there's another guy, Robin Schwam, I've been listening to greatly, and he has this really fascinating, he calls it the 20-20-20 rule, and I've been adopting that more. You know, the first 20 minutes are that 20 minutes of just meditation, gratitude, prayer, whatever it may be, right? Just kind of putting your mind in the right space. Next thing is physical exercise. So in the summers, I love going bike riding, whether it be 20 minutes, sometimes it's up to an hour, like on weekends. But physical activity, more and more evidence is showing that it really coincides with brain activity, right? So the more you can be physically active in the morning, the more it's going to prime your brain to be at its maximum. So after that physical activity, it's then saying, what am I going to do? Now that I'm motivated, now that I have, you know, a sense of gratitude and, you know, the universe is the possibility, what do I want to do? And then kind of setting the goals so you have your day kind of set before you. And again, Robin Schwam is who I got it from. He says, you know, 5 to 6, nobody's up, nothing's happening. People who've worked till 2 in the morning are already home by 5, so that's the magic hour. But as long as I can do it to me before 7 o'clock, you know, if I can get those things done, then everybody starts up their day by 7 o'clock on average. And, you know, you're just flowing with it, and you've got a great advantage on things.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And yeah, and also, you know, we talk about meditating, and for folks out there, especially like men, right? The whole machismo and all that stuff. When you think about like meditating, people think about like yoga. And this used to be me as well, right? Like, oh man, I can't imagine what my friends would think if I was like wearing tights and stretching. That'd be kind of crazy, right? But it's not that, guys. I mean, just clearing your mind really helps out, and in whatever way you can do it, you know, get it done. You know, I had a thing for a long time where I would actually, and I still do it now, I would come down to my basement, shut all the lights off completely, just complete darkness. And I put on calm music and I smoke a cigar. And it just helps kind of just clear my mind and get myself ready for what I'm planning. You know, so whatever way it is for you that kind of elicits that brain flow and that mind flow to get you in the right space is important. And definitely, I think I'm with you on the mornings, though, man. You know, trying to get up earlier and earlier as I get older, and trying to reach that, you know, 6 a.m., 5:30 a.m., and 5 a.m. I mean, those are like the tough hours, man. You know, sometimes 6, you're like, all right, 6:15, 6:30, 6:30. All right, cool. It's 7. All right, I'm ready now. So that's fantastic, man, and that's some great information with the apps on there.
You bring up a really good point too. That I mean, for some works, it's finding your. I mean, I know some very successful people that meditate at the evening, at the end of their day, and do yoga at the end of the day. So again, it's what fits in for you, right? Figure out your particular body rhythm. What whether it be prayer, whether it be meditation, whatever works for you. I think as long as you're able to find that time to reflect, to have some introspective time, and to work on your spirit. Right. Certain religious beliefs talk that, the body is just the machine, right? It's the spirit that's driving. And all of this is for the spirit to be able to experience the physical world. Right. And so it is about building the right space for the spirit to be able to re-energize and rejuvenate itself. So you're right. Whatever time I think works for you, and even start there. I mean, there were times where I would do yoga at the end of the day, and I just found that I like doing it later at the end of the day. You're always evolving, right? And part of the evolve is change. So for the listeners, it's start off little, right? When I started meditating, it was only for 3 minutes, and now I'm up to 10, 15 minutes. So everything is incremental. You're not going to change your life from one day to the next. But you can't change it from one year to the next, day by day. Mm-hmm.
As we come on up on the new year, everyone's going to be making their New Year's resolutions, changing their lives, all that. But the power of doing small things repetitively, I think sometimes gets missed. People want to change their life drastically. Oh, January 1st, I'm going to wake up at 4:30 and I'm going to go to the gym for 3 hours. I'm going to eat. No, you're not. Small little steps. Over and over, like you said, water, the power of water, right? It doesn't just go through a mountain in one day. It takes years and years and years of carefully going through that one path day in and day out until it starts to change that environment. So that's powerful, man.
Absolutely. And last night, Elvis, we were at a gala last night, which is how this all came about, and we definitely appreciate you taking the time before your travels today. We talked a little bit about branding last night, if you remember. So what do you think is the importance of personal branding, of building your, we hear a lot of these things like companies, Nike or Reebok or whatever the case, and that's their brand. Like, a lot of people don't know who runs Nike. Mm-hmm. We just know when we see that check mark, it's like, man, just do it, right?
Yes.
But what's your take on personal branding on Elvis Cordova? Mm-hmm. What is your take on that and the people you surround yourself with? Because, we all had maybe friends or people that we had around at some times that now we look back and we're like, man, I'm glad that guy's not here with me, because maybe the White House would have never opened those gates. You know what I mean? So what's your take on personal branding and your advice for folks out there for their immediate circle of influence?
I always remember in Latin America, there's like, show me who you're with and I'll tell you who you are, right? That saying, taking that to another level too, it's, you are your tribe, right? Or you are your team, right? Whatever it may be for you. And so I think that the immediate community that you build for yourself is important, because we talked about it's what they do to either motivate you or to keep you off track, man. You're hanging out with the wrong people for the wrong reasons. I mean, they're into a certain type of lifestyle that's going to take you that way. And some of us do it for acceptance sometimes, right? Or maybe it's just the only community around us. And I think that it takes, my personal brand is having that courage, right? And saying, no, again, taking that time to know what you want to do, identify your passions, and aligning all of this together and saying, this is what I want to do in my life. One of the, a long time ago, and I can't quite remember, was just before Argentina, I remember somebody saying to me, write your obituary. I'm like, how morbid can you get, dude? But the exercise was all about, when you write your obituary, right? And an obituary is something that you see in the newspaper saying this person has passed away and this is their life in a paragraph, right? This is what they did. This is who they leave behind. And so in doing that, it summarizes your life. So doing that from an early stage tells you, what do you want to do with your life, right? It goes back to your question of like, how crystal clear is that end goal? And so when I got to Argentina, I developed this small little system where I had short-term goals, which were goals from 1 to 3 months, long-term goals, which were 6 to 12 months, I'm sorry, the short term were 1 to 6 months, long term were 6 to 12 months, and then I had my leisure goals, right? And for each of these were 5 things that I would write down. And my leisure goals were things like, oh, I want to go visit this park, or I want to go on this hike, or I want to, see this particular movie or play or whatever it be, or this piece of art. And the last one was my obituary. Like, what do I want my life to have been about? Now, the first part of that was the short-term goal. Just let you know what you need to do immediately, because that essentially feed into the 1 year longer term goals, right? The leisure goals were critical because they're things you want to do for fun anyways. And usually I'd end up doing those first, but the fact that I was doing things and scratching them off my list was helping me build momentum. So if I said, oh, look, I did all these things, well, maybe I can do all these things too, right? And then all of those eventually fit into this, what I called the life, or I used to call it career at that point. And what happens with that is, and I would do these every 6 to 12 months, I would redo this list. And what I started seeing in that career section was saying, at one point I wanted to be a race car driver. At one point I wanted to be an actor, right? At one point I wanted to be a pilot. But there were certain things that were always showing up, like writer was one of them, right? I want to be, a statesman is what I would call it, right? I want to do economic development. I want to be an entrepreneur. Those kept showing up in my life, in my list. And so that, again, was another way for me to identify this is where my passions lie. Because what you're doing with that list is you're taking a snapshot. But that snapshot done continuously over a period of time begin to give you a movie, right? And that's what a movie is. It's a collection. It's a motion picture, right? It's a collection of still frames. And after that, you see the motion. And so that made particular sense. And I learned this from people, right? All of this comes from people that I've talked to, that, have mentored me, people that I mentor. One thing about mentorship, too, is that at this stage of the game, I realized that mentors can also be older and younger, right? So don't limit yourself to being mentored by somebody. I mean, millennials are amazing. I mean, you all doing this is great. I'm learning from you all right here, right? I've always wanted to do a podcast. And when you said this yesterday, I was like, sure. Because how do you do one? And I'm learning right now how to do one. You guys are doing an amazing job. But, it goes back to surrounding yourself with the right people that will give you the motivation, that will give you a sense of community, that will give you the reassurance, and that will motivate you to move forward. And I think that's been a mantra of mine, something that I live by, is just surrounding myself. I have a saying that I always want to be remembered by, and maybe this is the chance to do it. I wrote it, and I said, always surround yourself with people that you look up to, because one day you'll find yourself seeing eye to eye with them, right? And so I always seek to be either the less informed person in the room, the dumbest person in the room, the youngest person in the room, because I know that all I have to do is go up from there, right? So always looking at folks who are doing things that I wanted to do, who are doing better than I am, and who are going to be motivating me, because if you approach it right, you will learn from them. And that great moment comes where they're asking you for advice, or you're on par with them and you're able to be at the table with them. That's when life is great.
Yeah.
No, that's great, man.
I think we can end it on that. That is some, as Jonah said earlier before we started the podcast, you're going to learn today. So, guys,
fantastic.
This was great. You can catch us on all the different platforms. Google, we're on Stitcher now, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Instagram is up, idiot_philosophers. That's where you can find links to everything. Please subscribe, rate, review. We cannot grow unless you guys do that. Elvis, thank you so much, man. We appreciate it.
Oh, guys, thank you.
Anytime you want to come on and podcast with us, you're more than welcome.
Man, no, I'd love to. I'd love to. You guys are doing great work, and I congratulate you, man. This is quite an endeavor. And to the listeners out there, too, listening, man, support these folks, man. They're doing some great things, and be part of their community, right? It'd be great to have some of the listeners be up
there
here.
You go.
Absolutely.
Being part of it. That's how we all do it together.
Thank you, sir. Until next time, guys. This has been the Idiot Philosophers Podcast. Peace.